I was overjoyed as an all-encompassing sense of achievement filled my heart. The freedom I coveted so much felt within an arm's reach. I could hardly believe we had escaped. We didn't talk, we were listening to the roar of the engine, enjoying the exhilaration of successfully leaving the camp. Larboards put a heavy foot on the accelerator. We raced towards freedom at full speed. I kept clutching the handhold. The experience made my spirits soar, and I started to let out an involuntary shout of triumph, joined by Géza and Cricket. Labort smiled, never taking his eyes off the road. We bounced around in our seats, shouting and laughing, having a great time. After the mood had calmed down, Labort was again interested in the high beams, so I started flipping switches on the dashboard, still without success. I asked what the text on the dashboard meant. Labort didn't respond. Cricket read out the text with difficulty, then Labort beat him to it. No smoking and no naked lights. Unfortunately, this did not help. I finally found it. The high beam switch was all the way inside at his knee. I pulled it. From then on we had a view of the road long ahead. "Do you know where we're going?" "Not really," Labort admitted. "After such a commotion, I'm sure they'll send troops out. That's why we had to go back for the car. We can get further this way. We can beat the crowd." It's impressive how decisive he proved to be, not really affected by the stress. We saw the fire, and in a few seconds he assessed the situation and made a conclusion. He realized that our best chance was to get away from the crowd, because the soldiers, chasing the majority of the prisoners, would hopefully not be able to send a separate search team after the car. "We'll go to a place far enough, then we'll ask some civilians." Labort began, outlining his half-baked plan. "What was it with the fire? That wasn't in the plan," Géza interjected. "I don't know," replied our leader. "The fire wasn't my idea. Perhaps it wasn't an accident. Or someone saw us," I speculated. "He must have been preparing for it anyway, and when he saw us, he got the courage to do it." "How many people escaped?" Cricket asked. "Many," Labort said hopingly, but perhaps he was only trying to reassure us. Grumbled Géza. "They won't get far. Some of them will probably escape." "A few," agreed Géza. I would be glad to say that we did it, but that would be a lie. We never found out how many of the captives managed to escape, if the operation was successful or not. On top of that, we decided that only 4 of us would go. The others were on their own. "Show me that sewing machine." Géza nudged me, and I handed him a machine gun I had in my lap. Géza then studied the gun for a long time. "I guess there wasn't time to look for ammunition," Labort said. "We didn't think of it," Géza admitted. "Set it to semi-automatic," Labort suggested, and we did, since we had to save ammunition. "Interesting. Some people were more interested in revenge than escaping from the camp," he said, reflecting on what had happened. "In a dire situation, you learn a lot about a person's character that you might not otherwise," Labort explained. We didn't comment on what we had heard. We traveled in silence for several minutes through the unknown. I wondered if I should say something, lest Labort should think we found what he said was unimportant. But while I was thinking, too much time had passed for me to comment. We were glad to find that we had escaped with barely a few bruises. We had to refuel sooner than we would have liked to. We took what petrol we had. We could say the can was only half full because its contents were splashing around. I watched downhearted how much the can must be tilted to be drained from the very beginning. I regretted that we hadn't found the other one, the only explanation being that the saboteur had taken it to start a fire. Later, we started talking about who we were, how we lived before we were captured, and finally, what we would do once we got home. Hallowed stayed out of these conversations. He seemed to focus on driving. I tried to inquire politely, but he revealed nothing about himself. We traveled for a long time, then took stock of what we had and discussed how we could manage the next few days. Hallowed knew a lot about nature, and Géza was no stranger to life without a tent. We realized that the car would have to be abandoned painfully soon, as it was too conspicuous, especially since it would be sought after. We had to look like civilians living their lives if we wanted to be ignored. "Something is wrong," said Hallowed. "What's wrong?" I asked back. Instead of answering, he turned onto the grass beside the road and stopped. The dawn was breaking. It was a foggy morning. We all got out of the car, the chill in the air not really bothering us anymore. Once we stopped, I lent Hallowed my shoes, because it's hard to drive barefoot. "The blinker is on," said Cricket. Hallowed sat back, switched off the turn signal with Cricket's help, then started to fiddle with the 3 levers next to the gearbox, humming. Finally, he settled on one and pulled on it, but the lever wouldn't move. The differential was jammed. It had to be reversed out. "Come on, Cricket." He waved to our friend, who quickly jumped into the passenger seat. Hallowed put the vehicle in reverse. The differential lock prevents the rear wheels from turning at different speeds. Because we were driving the car with the rear wheels locked together, the gears were cramped by the forces appearing during the turns. Hallowed relieved the tension by making turns while reversing, as if he were driving on a slalom track. Meanwhile, Cricket kept tugging the lever until he managed to open the differential lock. While we were watching the operation, Géza walked up to me. "This man is a beast," he said quietly. I thought I detected something strange in his voice. I looked at him, startled, and studied his face to ascertain the impression, and from his look I gathered the same thing I had suspected to hear in his voice. Géza was afraid. I almost shudder even now as I say it. He searched for words for a few seconds. Hallowed stopped reversing and began to explain the function of the levers to Cricket in a loud voice. "It is normally the rear wheels that are driven. In this case, the front hubs can be open or locked. Of course, it's better if they are open, because then the front diff doesn't rotate, so it doesn't wear and the car consumes less fuel." Géza spoke again. "I was trained and I was among the best in the army. But when the soldiers caught up with us at the car," he pressed his lips together and turned away for a second. "An open differential splits the torque evenly between each of the 2 wheels it is connected to, so if one of those 2 wheels comes off the ground..." It happened in an instant. He killed them so fast, I couldn't even follow what was happening. Suddenly the bodies fell. I didn't even know if it was him or the enemy. Hallowed went on, briskly explaining the mysteries of 4-wheel drive to Cricket. When we ran out of petrol, we hid the car in the trees and covered it with branches. We were sure they would be looking for it. They'd better not know which way we had gone. Hallowed took the knife he had brought from the storeroom, which he kept with him at all times from this moment on. He carried it in a belt pouch around his waist. We had been feeling low after the evening's exhilaration. The night without sleep was beginning to show. and the thought of the march ahead of us was weighing on our spirits. Our belongings were spread out in 3 bread bags, tied with a string and carried as a rucksack. Lobots tied a string with a detachable knot, which, in case of an emergency, if we were forced to run, could be untied in one motion and left behind. Strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way, Lobots quoted from the Bible, and with that we set off. We didn't know which way to go, just wanted to get as far away from the camp as possible. At first we walked at night, following the stars towards northwest. Often almost in complete darkness, we neither had the means nor the audacity to use a light. We didn't want to take any risks. At night we could sneak around unnoticed. During the day there would have been a chance of people asking questions. We looked for forest roads or paths, because it was incredibly difficult to walk up and down the hills in the undergrowth. We found it easier to walk even 2 times as far on a gently sloping path than to walk on a roller coaster track. We talked little, ate little, had little rest, had little fun. In fact, we hardly did anything except for walking. And it left its mark on our mood. During the day, we huddled in a bush, one of us on guard, if sleep didn't overwhelm him. I suspected the journey home would not be a piece of cake, especially since I kind of forgot the taste of cake. Anyway, somewhere deep down, I hoped it would be better than the camp. I was disappointed. The days passed with a dull and unenjoyable murkiness in the air. In our physical needs, we were more deficient than we had been at the camp by the end, but we were compensated in spirit by the knowledge that this road was already leading in the right direction, that we were not suffering in vain, that with every step we took we were getting closer to home. All that walking and sleep deprivation was exhausting, so much so that I even neglected to write in the diary. Not that anything important happened during those days. I did, however, write down one thing Lobot said that affected me deeply. The night is coldest before sunrise. It will get worse before it gets better. And he was right. The trek passed like a freezing night. At dawn you can see the sky begin to clear, but the weather is still terribly cold, and it's only after sunrise that the air starts to warm up. One twilight I opened my eyes sleepily. I had to get up. The night march was about to take place. Lobots promised that day or the next we would go into a village and ask the locals for directions to the border. We hoped that news of the escape had not reached this point. I was surprised that even raising my arm was difficult. I had to make a deliberate effort. I had to prepare to lift it and reach into the bag. I rummaged around for the canteen. So many times I was weak. I didn't do what I was supposed to, and I always regretted it. This time I will be strong. This thought encouraged me. Emotions are difficult to name, often even to recognize. Most of the time, we just say we're upset. But recognizing and accepting our emotions helps us not to be overwhelmed by them. A young child gets angry when his parents stop him from doing what he wants to do. He wants to spill the flour because it's interesting how it spreads and flies in the air, but his mother won't let him. As we grow, most of us learn to deal with such situations, to accept when we are not allowed to do something. Later, we also have to learn how to use coercive force against ourselves, which is much harder. We have to give up something we want and can do, or force ourselves to do something we don't want to do. Who likes to learn? Yet we do. Cricket once said, "Studying is unpleasant, but not as much as failing." I don't know where he got that from, but I found it relevant. I was also hoping that after the escape the hunger would end, but I was disappointed. The food we brought from camp had to be rationed. We couldn't gorge ourselves. It was in those days that I gave a name to emptiness. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name itself. As I said, I neglected to write a diary. I began to feel what Hallowed must be experiencing when he stares into the void. I often wondered what he was thinking about, but as I walked along I realized it was probably nothing. In a kind of half-dream he lets the seconds pass by. I wrote in the diary that we found hazelnuts, because it made me particularly happy. We picked them all, they almost filled one bag. We prepared them during daytime vigil, so staying awake was easier. We didn't hit them, but crushed them with a heavier stone to make less noise. Many of them had holes and some were empty, but we didn't mind it. We collected the intact nuts in the bag and ate them for days. They tasted good. I ate so much my jaw got tired of chewing for so long. Diary, May 24th. Tired, sleepy, hungry. There are more and more fights between us. Even Hallowed is behaving terribly. Today, when we were getting ready to leave, folding the blankets, I told him I look up to him. He got upset, said he was fed up with acting, didn't want to talk to me. With that, he turned and went into the woods. I thought he wasn't coming back, but he just sat down on a fallen tree a number of meters away from us. Later, while walking, he came and apologized. I didn't know what to say. We all say things we regret, but few of us are brave and humble enough to say we are sorry. On reflection, I usually just wait and let time take the meaning of my words. Even though he hurt me, his apology makes me respect Hallowed even more. Diary, May 25th. We found nettle. We rubbed our shirt around our hands, plucked off a bunch. No onions, no spices, but that's okay. We washed the nettle. It barely stings when wet. We didn't make a stir fry. We just sprinkled the nettles with flour, simmered them for a few minutes, then poured in water and added chopped potatoes and garlic. It was really good. We had enough for once. Diary, May 26th. What Hallowed said about pretending, it really stuck with me. Ever since then, every time I hear him talk, I wonder if he's saying it because he means it or if it's part of the act. It rained today. It was terrible. We had nowhere to hide outside. We huddled under the blankets and waited for it to pass. Hallowed said that we have to find out exactly where the border is and where we can cross it. We couldn't be far wrong about the northwest direction. That way we must be heading home from the Mescan area. We estimate that we covered 20 kilometers per night, so we are about 140 kilometers from the starting point today. We could easily be near some of the villages along the border now. We'll talk to the locals tomorrow. Diary, May 28th. Reading can also fill this role, but books are not at my disposal, so I mostly use writing to escape and get away from loneliness. Writing is interesting and surprisingly pleasant because it takes my mind off the problems of the present, which is especially useful when I know full well that I cannot do anything myself to change things. I also encounter difficulties in writing, especially when trying to convey feelings authentically. Maybe it is me, or maybe it is because we talk so little about emotions that our language has few words to describe them accurately. That's why I can't describe the feelings themselves, only their impact on my actions, in hopes that by thinking of those actions, I can decipher the feeling again when I'm reading the diary. I keep thinking about what led me into this state. I can't get the woman I saw in the camp out of my mind. The one thing I saw her do was so striking that the memory of it has stayed with me and lives on in my dreams.